So I'm Holly, and I started rowing in 2013 with the Start scheme with British Rowing, and I then moved on to the senior team and have been representing Great Britain since 2017.
Hi everyone, I'm Kyra. I've been on the senior DB rowing team for about a year now. I've been on various pathways since I was about 13 years old. We're here today to have some discussions basically around the fact that my mum is white and she's from England, and my dad is from a little island in the Caribbean called St. Kitts, and he is black.
Cool. So we ought to sort of explain how this conversation came about, I guess. And really it sort of stemmed from, so I rang Kyra last weekend after a pretty turbulent couple of weeks and a kind of global outcry off the back of what's been happening in America. And I was really just trying to understand a bit more about her experiences. And I felt quite ashamed actually at that point, because I realized that I'd played a really passive role in fighting racism pretty much my whole life, I suppose. And there's that quote, isn't there, about all it takes for evil to flourish is for good men to do nothing. And I guess I felt quite guilty that I sort of fell into that category. And so, I rang Kyra because I was keen to change that and understand her experiences of being a person of colour in the UK, and work out what I could do to be a better ally and a better friend to you. That's kind of how this conversation started. And I know you want to share your experiences and help people start conversations and listen to people. And I know you've mentioned about being nervous about speaking on behalf of like millions of people. And I'm also quite nervous. I don't want to ask the wrong thing or cause offence. But we've kind of agreed, haven't we, that this is a really open conversation, and we know that we're both mates. So even if someone says something that's, a little bit harsh or accidentally rude, I guess, like it's a safe place to have this discussion, and hopefully by the end of it we're still friends.
I agree with everything Holly just said. I think it's really important to me to be able to voice the things that maybe wouldn't normally be heard about a month ago, and it's a great time to be able to have conversations like this. And it's for me, and I think both of us, it's a way to encourage others to have really similar conversations that aren't on camera, and that can be with anyone. And I think it's just important to see what it feels like to have a safe space where people can open up and can be vulnerable and are able to really tell their real truth about what's going on, and a really safe space to listen and understand. And I trust like Holly is here to do that.
Hopefully. Cool. So I guess it'd be the best place to start is to just ask you how you found the last few weeks, really.
So the last few weeks for me have been pretty overwhelming. There's been like so many different feelings. Some of them were really good and some of them are just really low and really sad. So for me, it's really positive that there is suddenly this almost buzz on the Black Lives Matter movement, and that it's becoming so relevant in social media and in the news, and it's getting so much attention, and that is so important and so significant. And this whole like Blackout Tuesday thing, it felt a few different emotions. Some of them like, oh great, these people like really want to show they care, they do recognize there's an issue, and everyone really wants to stand against racism. But at the same time, these are the same people who are the people who skirt around conversations about race, awkwardly don't really want to talk about it, aren't really going to go to a protest, aren't really going to stand up when someone gets called the N-word next to them, or aren't really going to do something actively to actually create change. And so that was really difficult for me to know, is this Black Square actually making any difference? Are people really doing anything different? What does it really mean to post a Black Square on your Instagram? And are people being genuine when they say they want to do something different? And is it just a social media fad? Is this going to go anywhere? Like a lot of different, opposing, but also sometimes really positive feelings. And I think we're coming through this few weeks and we're seeing really positive changes in loads of different ways. And just having this conversation is a really big way to start. And people having conversations is a great place to start. I just found there are so many feelings, and to put it in perspective, the main feeling was just the sadness for the loss of another Black life at the hand of the people who were supposed to keep us safe. And there were some days where we were just so low that it was so on the news and it was so in your face. And just one day in the middle of it, I just broke down crying because it was just all getting too much. Because it's a lot to be able to see, like, consistently be reminded of the truth that is today, and that my life is apparently less valuable to police officers in both countries, in the US and in the UK. And for many different reasons. So it's not something you want to have in your face when you like open Instagram or you open the news. And at the same time, I'm really positive that there is so much tension and so much anger coming from it and passion towards it.
Yeah, I think that's really it's really interesting to hear. And I'm really sorry that you have had to feel that way. And I know it won't be over yet. And I guess one of the reasons that I want to have this conversation, and kind of on behalf of other members of the rowing team, is to kind of say that we're here for you and we want to support you and try and be better. And it's interesting you mentioned the Black Lives Matter, like the Blackout Tuesday thing, because I have my own huge internal dilemma, because on the one hand, I post it immediately to be like, I don't want people to think that I'm racist or supporting this, so I absolutely have to get that out, and I want that to show and people to know that I'm against it. But at the same time, realizing that then you get a lot of criticism for it as well, because people quite rightly pointing out that it takes 2 seconds to post a black screen, and then what are you actually doing, and is it a bit more of a performance thing than an actual action thing? So yeah, it's it's a really difficult one as well for people like me to get right, because I just want to support you, and so it's working out what the best way to do that is. But if you say kind of like conversations and that kind of thing is the best place to start, then I think hopefully people will start doing that off the back of what you said.
Yeah.
So I guess the next question to ask really is, how does it feel to be the only person of colour in the British rowing team in 2020?
Yeah, so it's quite a big question, and has lots of different meanings, really. What it means to be the only person of colour in any room, and what it means to be the only person of colour in a specific team full of lots of different individuals, and also what it means to have always been predominantly the only Black person or person of colour in any team or any rowing team that I've been a part of. And I think through the years it's evolved and it's been different. And in the being on the team at the moment, it hasn't definitely. I mean, I can honestly say I don't have any negative experiences directly from other people, and I haven't faced some extreme racial abuse, or I haven't faced anyone telling me to get out of the team or something extreme or ridiculous. It's really a lot of little things, a lot of microaggressions, and a lot of lack of communication around the subject that are really what build up to make you feel alienated in the situation. And there's really simple things like once when I wanted to talk to a coach about some research I found out about the way a Black person's hips are, and I'd had really trouble with my hips, and I remember talking to the coach and saying, "Oh, I found this like research about the hips of Black people and how they're different," and the reaction was like, and it was, and I was like, okay, and he was just like, oh well, everyone's hips are different, so that's always something we have to address. Everyone's individual, and I was like, okay, okay, so we'll avoid this conversation, and it's just like really small stuff, and it's it's a lot about a lack of representation and a lot of just isolation a lot of the time. It's not to say that any of my teammates have ever said anything towards me where I can turn around and say they're racist. It's really different than that. Yeah.
I think that's so interesting to hear, because it's when you talk about it's not the big things and no one's being overtly racist, but it is the little microaggressions that add up. And yeah, it's you try and, from my perspective, I'm trying to stop and kind of do a stock take of when I might have accidentally almost said something or not brought into a conversation or whatever it might be, and you don't really recognize at the time that what you're doing is actually subconsciously ignoring that section. And yeah, it's I think going forwards I will try and be a bit more kind of aware of my actions and my behaviors in those kind of spaces and in those kind of conversations. And yeah, it's interesting what you say about the coach and that kind of thing, because I think, yeah, we just don't, in the same way as sometimes women have experienced in the past being kind of blocked out of some conversations. Yeah, it's and now that's becoming less of an issue. It's still a problem, of course, but we're really benefiting as women at the moment from a lot of focus being turned on us, and that's great. But yeah, it's the same for you, I suppose, as a person of color. That's the next big step, that we need to take and open up that conversation as well. You're actually also the first person of color to win a medal for Great Britain at juniors, at under 23s, and then also to medal at the Olympic trial that we had this year. And it must be such a strange feeling to be literally the first person to do something. I mean, what's that like?
I mean, there's a lot of feelings, and some of them are actually really positive, and some of them are more about the feelings that lead into actually achieving those goals. And for example, when I started out in the sport, it's a bit like a white person starting out and saying they want to do a 100-meter sprint. You see the Olympic final full pretty much of like people of color, and it seems almost impossible. Like, how do I actually get in there? Is my body capable? Is there something my body literally can't do? Like, no one's ever done this before. Why would I be able to do it? And there's a lot of questions and unknowns, and I think when I was younger, it was a lot harder for me to articulate where those feelings were coming from. I mean, I knew I was different, but I think I hadn't quite clicked on what it meant to be Black until I got to university and what that actually meant in a big picture. I think what it's like to be the first is the same for a lot of questions. And I mean, I don't want to bring in Michelle Obama and act like I'm anything in any way like Michelle Obama. But reading her autobiography and talking about being the first lady, and she was saying being the first Black lady, first lady, was crazy, because being the first Black anything is overwhelming, and it almost feels like I'm representing something every time I even just walk into a locker room or something, because it's a lot bigger than being on the water. It's about the connotations that come with being a person of color and what that means to be outside of the water and what it means to be a teammate. And there are so many aspects of what it means to be like Black in today's society, and so that's really difficult to have that whole expectation of you to represent a whole race. And to me, it's it wasn't really about when I was a junior. It wasn't really about anything other than like, oh, this is really fun, I want to go and win something. And when I went to 23s, it also wasn't really about that. But definitely this year at Olympic trials, and having really in the back of my mind that there has never been any person of color to go to the Olympics for Great Britain. To me, I was like, okay, I'm going to put everything into this, and I'm going to make sure I can leave I can leave this year and this Olympic year being like I tried my best and giving everything, not just for me, but this is way bigger than me. And I know that was literally my biggest motivation for the whole of Olympic trials was this is way bigger than me. And this is something that I want to show that as a race, we are good enough, and not just good enough, we're great. And not to say we're any greater than any other race, but we're here and we're equal. And so the way it's felt to be the first person of color to do anything has definitely evolved throughout time. And yeah, it's I'm now proud to say all of those things, but it's only the start, really. And the main reason why I feel it's so important is because I want there to be more diversity within sport. I want to be a visual for people to realize that it isn't you because the color of your skin. That isn't what stops you from doing rowing. It's something that can make, that is nothing to get in your way, and it shouldn't be a full stop on your rowing journey just because you don't fit in with the people that look like they get all the medals at the Worlds or the Olympics. And so that's definitely been a great motivation for me this year.
Yeah, that's so good, because I guess that just speaks to visibility, doesn't it, as a whole? And the more that we have people, you know, from all nationalities and all diversities and, you know, all genders and all that kind of stuff visible on these international stages, you know, in sport, but also music and, you know, film and stuff, it is so important because, you know, for you, it's really impressive that you have not been held back, I guess, by the barrier of not seeing yourself, you know, portrayed previously. And it's just, you know, it's so natural to me. You know, I don't really think about whether or not it's a possibility. I suppose I consider it from a physical point of view, like, will I actually be good enough? But in terms of, you know, the opportunities for white women to make it to the Olympic Games, it's just, well, yes, of course, you know, they can do that. So, yeah, I completely can see, you know, it's about getting people visible in those environments so that the younger generation of people of color grow up feeling a bit more empowered and able to chase their dreams and stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's really cool. And why do you think you're the only person of color in the GB rowing team? Like, you know, how have we missed that by 2020?
Like, great question. I mean, it's a really complex whole conversation in itself. And for me, I stumbled upon rowing. So I kind of did like indoor rowing at school, and it was really helpful that I was quite good at that. And so not everyone gets on a rowing machine age 13 and is quite good at it. Like, I can probably speak for most people on the team. They probably, if they got on the egg at 13, they were like, I'm not doing this stuff. I need to get away from this sport ASAP.
I still feel like that now.
And it was a case of being like, oh, okay, maybe I should try this. And I go to my local rowing club, which was also just like a happy accident that I happened to be near a start center. And so for like GB rowing start is this idea that they get people in the system where they build them up to kind of on the pathway toward the Olympics. You have to have like certain height and strength and stuff. And so that was a great happy accident that I was there, and I got this great coach and coaches really that really gave me a lot of attention, and was quite empowering that I was the only junior at the center for quite a while. And so I often just have like one-on-one coaching with my coach. And so it made me feel like, oh, I just keep doing this. People really like me here. You know, this is great. And then I wasn't really in a team where I had to think about anything other than myself, not in a selfish way, but I didn't have to think, oh, no one here looks like me, because there was no one else there. It was just me. So there was not really much in that way. And so it was kind of just, okay, well, I'll just get on with doing this. And then, I mean, there was just so much positive reinforcement. Like, it was great when I was 15, I ended up getting this British record or something on the erg. And then I ended up going to like, representing Great Britain at this thing called GB France when I was 15. And then I did another thing called like Coupe, which is like European kind of championships thing. And then when I was like 17, I went to the Junior Worlds and then got a rowing scholarship in the States. And I went to UCLA for 4 years. And I mean, then I really can't quit rowing in the middle of those 4 years. So and then I get back from UCLA last year, and then I'm hopped into the team. I didn't even I just kind of almost by accident get into the team because they need like a seat for the Worlds that year. And then that's really helpful that there's funding and there is kind of attention and almost a kind of retention aspect that people want me to stay rowing. And so here I am. I've kind of been put on this conveyor belt, and I never really had to do too much thinking as to is this for me? This kind of weird that no one here looks like me, and all that kind of stuff. It was a lot of kind of coincidences that I managed to be here, and now I feel a great responsibility that I managed to get here, and it's because of random coincidence, and that isn't really how it should be. Like, a lot of people start for different reasons in this sport, and a lot of them are they went to private school and they rowed at private school at Eton, and then they that was the best thing to do. And then Oxford or Cambridge, you could go did the blue boat, and that was really cool and stuff. And I don't know, there's many more stories that aren't accidental. I think there was someone who went to Cambridge and
But I know what you mean, though. Talking about just being on that conveyor belt and being lucky, but at the same time, I think it's important that you don't downplay your own commitment and something, because rowing's not easy, and actually through all those years you've had to train really hard to do that. So I wouldn't take anything away from yourself by sort of glossing over it by using the term conveyor belt. But I do know what you mean, because I feel like I've had a similar thing myself, really. But yeah, I guess I can understand now why you feel a bit of a responsibility to make it easier in some ways, I suppose, for people to follow you. And we'll try, and a part of this conversation as well is trying to work out how British rowing can open those doors and I guess create more conveyor belts for other people to kind of make it helpful, or make it easier for other people of colour to get into the team. Because the one thing I was going to ask on that, though, is, so this is one of those questions where I'm going to get pulled for being contentious. But I was looking at some of the stats from a censorship in 2019, and I guess one of the questions that could be asked is that in this census, 3.3% of the population identified as black. And so if you take the GB rowing team, which is 70 odd athletes, well, actually 3.3% of that is about two people of colour, two black people. So are we that far away if we've got one in yourself?
So, I mean, that's a really good question, and definitely something I've sat and pondered myself. And to say something as well now we have one black person is to really oversimplify that whole question, I think. And to start off with, yes, 3.3% of the population are black. I'm not one of those 3.3%. If on a census, I would be mixed race because I'm half black, half white. So after having 0 black people on the whole entire team, and that's much greater than just the athletes. That's the support staff, the coaches, all of the other people around the whole sport, and the British rowing team. And so we're still really far off that, and it's something that is way much greater than right now. Black people were free from slavery over 100 years ago, and we got equal rights many Olympiads ago. And if we truly were equal, then at that point we should have had equal representation straight away. And I think it just really highlights the fact that the world still isn't equal, and there still is a problem, and we really need to open our eyes to that problem and not just think, oh, it's a problem in some of the country, or it's not really a problem in this issue because we're all happy and we all like black people, because I think it's a way greater issue that's a problem of lack of inequality, lack of ability, resources, and when it comes to rowing, it's a sport of the wealthy in a lot of cases. I mean, if we look at sports where the equipment is a lot cheaper, so if we go to running, where it's definitely not as expensive as buying a 10 grand boat or etc. The whole diversity and the whole representation of people of color totally shifts. It's a whole different story when we look at the sports that are cheaper, like football, and in America we have basketball and American football, and to compare like between sports, I think it's kind of obvious that it's definitely not a capability. It's not like black people are athletic. It's not black people couldn't possibly be good rowers. And I mean, when you think of it, even in a bigger picture, about not even that many generations ago, 10 or so generations ago, we were being bred and paid for as livestock. For the more muscly and athletic person you could find, you go from being worth £7 to £20, and it's something that isn't an accident that there are lots of athletic people, and there's been research into why they're such good runners and so athletic, and it's something that's often looked over because it's too hard to think about. But I think we really have to take into account what it means to be a person of color and what that's meant through history and what that means now.
I think like hearing you speak about that topic is so powerful, and you know, it's actually hard. I mean, I'm not trying to turn this on me, but it's hard sitting here in this chair and hearing that and thinking, you know, that's my ancestors in a way, you know, being partly responsible for that. And it's really shocking to hear, and to hear it firsthand. And when you say it like that, you know, that actually in terms of sport, you know, black people really ought to be, you know, overrepresented because of the way that we've bred them. I mean, it's rare in a day that I learn something or read something or hear something that is so affecting. And I think I mean, you said lots of stuff today, but that's really hit. And I think, yeah, to people listening, I think that will really be a very powerful thing to have heard. So I know that can't be that easy to talk about. So yeah, just thank you for sharing that, because I think it's difficult, but really necessary to have brought up. Without moving on to a lesser topic too quickly, I was interested to go back to you talking about, you know, rowing in the States and that kind of thing, and trying to, you know, understand maybe were there differences. Obviously, we've heard a lot about the States in the media recently. Did you notice any differences when you were rowing at UCLA versus when you've been in the British rowing team?
So I think in general, rowing is quite a internationally similar sport, and it's quite a niche group of people. So I can't say there are any like great differences, but there are like small ones, and I felt there was definitely a lot more vocalization from my teammates about the fact that I was a person of color, and that was a bit different. And to me, that was actually really refreshing to be recognized as, not because I was like, great, I'm so amazing. It was more, oh, thanks for realizing this is actually like really like weird for me to be surrounded by only white people all the time. And um, and it wasn't even, and the things that I found different at UCLA were probably much greater than just a rowing team. And I mean, so I studied statistics at UCLA, and that was a really hard journey for me to be able to move into that kind of field. And I remember at the start, when I was like, okay, what do I want to do? Because in America, it works differently, where you can choose your major while you're at the uni, and you kind of do some classes and see what you like, and decide which one you want to pursue. And for me, I was like, oh, I really enjoy like stats. This is really fun. But I know that's weird. But but for me, I like literally loved it, and I would leave classes buzzing and just really enjoy maths and really enjoy computing and lots of things that went into statistics. And but then there was this ginormous reservation of mine that was like, well, you know, no, there's no like black people in these classes. So, you know, there's no one black people that I ever really see talking about stats. I don't really see anyone talking about like doing this kind of stuff. Like, it's probably really not for me. And there's so many parallels between what that felt at the start of rowing and like the start of my academic career. And for me, it was this really mountain to climb, to think about how I was gonna also do this sport that was full of white people, and then do this whole degree that was full of white people. And throughout my time at UCLA, I never ever in one of my major classes, I never saw one person of color, and that's crazy, because UCLA really prides itself off its diversity, and it's really quite a really quite liberal school, and it's a liberal place, and I loved UCLA for that. But it was just really rare for me to run across into any of my classes and see a different person of color. And if it was definitely a man. And so I definitely never saw one woman of color ever. And so that was really difficult. That was really difficult.
Because you talk quite modestly about that, but then you say you've been through sitting in those classes, and you're the only person of color, and you're definitely the only female person of color. But I know that you kind of graduated with the highest GPA of the STEM majors within the Pac-12 conference, which is like the top schools on the West Coast of the USA. So, once again, you're kind of breaking down that barrier. And I guess that must have given you quite a lot of confidence, I suppose, in your ability and what you've managed to achieve to that point.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there was a lot of revelations going through that whole journey, that whole 4 years. And I think one that really stands out for me was it was a couple years in, and it was this computing class. I remember at the start of the year, it was really when I was still trying to figure it out, and it was literally full of white guys. It was a mix of Asian guys and white guys, and really few women, really few, and definitely no one who was colored in any way. And so I was like, okay, well, and so the way that the classes work in America is it's all on a curve. So your grade is literally dependent on your rank in the class. So you get an A if you do top 10%, etc., etc. And I was like, okay, this was really difficult. These guys were really clever. I'm probably not really in the same league as these people. I don't even know if I should do this. I should drop out this major altogether. It's not for me, etc. And I had so many thoughts of imposter syndrome and not feeling like I should be there. And I remember when I literally still got the grades back at the end of the year, and I remember this was the first time I got top of the class in any class, I think, in my whole entire life, pretty much. And I remember just having this ginormous revelation, that it wasn't it wasn't that the tech world was full of white straight men because white straight men were the cleverest people. It was full of white straight men for various other reasons, and it wasn't because I wasn't capable enough. And I had to really prove that to myself throughout the course of those 4 years. And then I think that was a great revelation that I took into rowing, and coming out of university and being I know that rowing isn't full of white straight men or white women. It's not because other races aren't capable. It's just because how it's been a systematic feeder of only one kind of person. And so there's been a lot of journeys in between rowing and academics that have been really similar, and I think they've both inspired me from one to the other, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I guess it's interesting when you say that you realize it wasn't that Black people weren't clever enough. And I suppose I'm wondering do you remember when that started? When you started to feel that way, was it a gradual thing? Have you always felt that way, or was there a major event that caused you to feel that way and then have to break down the barriers later on?
I mean, really good question that I think I don't really know the answer to. But if I sit and think about the things that maybe stick out to me, I think it's definitely a gradual thing, and there's it's a lot about the media's portray how the media portrays different people and what you see of who the CEOs are and really who the CEOs are and how many of those are white and or the richest, wealthiest list, who are they and where's the representation there? And then there's like things in my life that I think maybe would stick out to me. And it's like sometimes it's really tiny things and it's actually almost more the absence of other things than it is necessarily direct racism towards me. And for example, like when I was in secondary school, like I remember like I was doing quite well in a lot of my exams and I was like, like got some GCSEs back and like I remember I got like all A stars and I was like, oh, this is really cool, great, that's fun. And I remember there was this like group called the Gifted and Talented group, and they all went to like look at Oxford and Cambridge, the tour, to see what kind of universities they might want to aspire to. And I remember just sitting and thinking like, I wonder why like I'm not in that group. That's kind of like strange. Like I feel like I got a bit better grades than some of those people, but like I don't know, maybe they just like see difference in them or something. And I kind of just like shoved it off and I was like, okay, well, that's whatever. But it's like tiny little things like that maybe I just didn't fit what they thought was really gifted and talented because I didn't fit that kind of mold, whatever the reason was. And I think it was when I went to like sixth form, like I was head girl. I was voted in head girl and stuff. And so it wasn't even like I was off the radar, and I was quite a big personality, I guess. So it wasn't even like something that I hadn't considered. And I'd done in other instances, I'd done quite well in my AS levels, and I was like, I think I might apply to like Oxford or Cambridge. Like this is cool, like And I remember the sixth form advisor just being like, I just don't think you'll fit in there. I don't think that's for you. I think maybe let's look at some other schools. And I was like,
wow.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah, I can do that. And then like I remember then I was like, okay, I was now looking at like USA universities, and they love recruiting in America. It's just like their things. They love recruiting. And one of the schools that like kind of in their own way offered me like a scholarship was Harvard, and for some reason they sent this like handwritten letter to my head of sixth form, to my school. I still to this day don't know how they got it, how they got the address and stuff. But and I remember like they handed it to me in the middle of like our like kind of area with like computers. I don't know what it's called, like a room that everyone chills out in or whatever. And I remember opening it and I was like, what's that? Because it was this big interesting like package for someone. How weird. And I remember like I opened this like this like offer from Harvard, and I was kind of just like, I don't know, by that point I was kind of just like, I don't really fit in there. I don't think I should even really look into this. I never even replied to this message that someone obviously put like a lot of time into doing. And to me, I was kind of just like, this isn't for me. And I still don't really know why. It just wasn't for me, apparently, in my head. And this was at a time where like Barack Obama was president and he graduated from Harvard Law, but still there was still this like feeling of like inadequacy. And I didn't really know how to articulate that until I kind of got to university and really kind of learned what it meant to be a person of color and what that meant on like a grand scale, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's just, I'm just comparing it to my own experience of those final few years of school. And, because I obviously did end up going to Cambridge, but the difference between the way that, you describe it as a little thing to not be put in the gifted and talented group that gets taken to Oxbridge to have a look around. But, I actually think that's a huge thing, especially when you're relatively young. That is a phenomenally big kind of moment of segregation. And I think if that had been me, even as a white person, let alone as a person of colour, to be told, nah, that's not really for you, would have been huge. So I can only imagine what it would have been like to be a person of colour on top of that. And comparing it to, when I was at school, I was at a grammar school, but it was basically like you were sort of funneled towards that the whole time. Like, yeah, give it a go. You might not get in, but it doesn't really matter. Like, just give it a go. And so the difference then between being told, basically don't even try, is huge. And yeah, to get into Harvard, without even applying, and then to not reply because you don't think you'd fit in there. I mean, yeah, astonishing. I can try and think of scenarios where I don't think I'd fit in, but in terms of universities and that kind of thing, all of them I would see as, as potentials. So yeah, it must be really, huge to just have this whole section of university life like written off for you, not even your choice. Yeah.
And I think I think a lot of people really I think it's hard to kind of articulate how and what it feels like to be a person of color, and I think a lot of people can compare it to not fitting in, and I think there are many instances where it does seem like, oh, I just won't fit in there, and it's not to say that other people don't fit in, and being a person of color is the only way you can feel like you can't fit in. But for me, as a person of color and being gay and being a woman, for me, it's like the most difficult one out of that, classic trio is like being a person of color, because there's with women, like everyone kind of, well, most people have a woman they're close to, whether it's their mum, their sister, a friend, and someone they like know and can relate to, and it's part of their life. And then being gay, like in Canada, in a professional setting especially, it's really not really like talked about, relative, important. Like you don't have to you don't have to go into an interview when you're applying for a job and think and disclose the fact that you're gay. It would be kind of weird if you brought it up. But like being a person of color, it's this like instantaneous assumption of you, and it's one that people are really really like attached to without even knowing, and one that often has only negative connotations, and it's rooted in this really atrocious history. And it's not just as simple as I don't know anyone who's colored. It's like it's way bigger than that. It's like it's one that people know has this history of being second-class citizens, and it's not even just a history, it's a present. We're still in this day and age being the face at the end of police brutality in the US and in England. And I don't want to bore everyone with stats, but there's still a significant difference in police brutality in England. And if George Floyd's death taught you anything, it's to show that you don't need guns to kill someone unlawfully in custody by the police. So to me, it's like a life or death thing, really, and that's how dramatic it is, and that's why it's a bit different to some of the other minorities I'm part of, and I mean, when you add on the intersectionality of all of those, it does definitely become more like alienating, and it's just one extra thing to have to kind of deal with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, really thought-provoking stuff. And I remember you saying to me before as well that it's not a t-shirt that you can take off. You have to fully own who you are every moment of every day, wherever you go. And yeah, that's just a really, obviously being a woman or a man is obvious as well, but in other senses, yeah, people are able to hide a lot of things about who they are that they might not want to share, and that's something that you can't hide at all. Yeah, I think you've raised a huge number of really interesting points, and many of which I'd never really even considered. So thanks for that, and I hope people listening can hear those messages as well. And I guess what I'd really like to know next, I suppose, is what advice would you give to people like me that want to be better going forwards?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason we're here to do this kind of podcast is really to open up that conversation, and for people to have these really similar and almost simple conversations that could open your mind to so many things. And I feel often when I do end up having a conversation with race with someone, normally they're really surprised. Like in conversations you and I have had, I feel like you've even been surprised by some of the things in my opinion. And I think there are a lot of presumptions that aren't necessarily negative, but are still there, and because we just don't talk about them. And I think people think avoiding the topic will just make racism go away, but if anything, it just perpetuates it, and it adds this idea of colorblindness, which definitely doesn't help a lot of situations. And I think, so I remember I was getting a book for camp, like a few months ago before coronavirus, and I walked into the bookshop, and I'm normally just around my my fiction section, and because I love a good murder mystery, something to read on camp, and I walked through the store, and I got my nice book that was about probably some, like, I don't know, fun fantasy thing or whatever, and I remember seeing this book, and title was "Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race." I remember just being like, I'm with you, sister. Like, amen. Let's stop talking about race to white people. It is too much. And so I went to the book and I read the blurb, and I was like, wow, this has sold me. This woman is onto something. And like, I still remember like reading. I just went home and I just wanted to read the first bit. And I remember I read the first few pages of the blog that I'd never seen before. The blog that started that whole book by Remy Otto Lodge, and I read the blog and just like I just like wept and cried, because not only had someone just perfectly articulated everything that it feels to have a conversation with a white person about race, but it was this whole awakening that I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't the only person who felt like this, and I wasn't alone, and I wasn't like going like mad, and it was just like a really good book. And then the rest of the book is just really great education for anyone who wants to know what it really feels like to be a person of color, and why there are differences. But I think yes, you can read books, and yes, you can read online, and that's great. But I think on a person-to-person basis, on a daily basis, I think the most important thing to me is just to literally just like, if you have a black friend, just go and like ask them like, hey, how you doing, and have that conversation, and ask, like, if you want to learn from the people like in your life, and have that conversation where you can ask the questions you want to ask. And I think and I feel like people try and get these answers from like media, social media, or news media, and I think to assume that like all black people are the same as like what we see on the media is like assuming all white people are like Donald Trump. Like it's it's not the same, and there's nothing
hang on, he's
valuable. What?
I said he's orange. Hold on a minute. He's not white.
It isn't like nothing more valuable than going and having that conversation. And I think if you don't have any black friends, then maybe like ask, why don't I have any black friends? And if it's something like, my work doesn't have any black people, and I just hang around with people from my work or my school, then like take a second and think, why doesn't my work have any black people in it? Like, and if you're a person of power, think, what is this reasoning for this? How can I change this? Like, is there racial biases? Was there two candidates that came across for a job, and one was white and one was black, and the white one just not, fit in more, like it was just with the vibe of the company, and if that's a classic like thing that happens to very similar people, but people just choose the one that's more similar to them. And I think let's celebrate diversity and celebrate difference instead of just shying away from it. And there's no better way to really understand why difference is so important and why we should celebrate it than just having those conversations and asking the questions like why, and the rhetorical questions to yourself, like where are the black people in my community, and what can I do? There's a safe space for everyone, black, white, gay, straight, Asian, Caucasian, whatever, like there's, I think it's just, with that, we can't get answers and we can't get change without asking questions, whatever they are, and asking the really important questions.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely agree. And as when you just mentioned there about, you learn more from talking to somebody than, you will off social media. I mean, I can absolutely do that from, the last hour of speaking to you. I've learned way more than I would if I was just, scrolling through social media, trying to read little, headlines or infographics and that kind of thing. So absolutely support that. I guess the one thing I'd ask is, I've heard people before talk about how in some other spheres, the more you talk about something, the more you perpetuate that there is a difference. And actually, is it helpful to, to just, okay, all right, we're all equal. Let's stop talking about it, because you constantly making there be a divide. I suppose you'd say in this instance that doesn't apply.
Yeah, like really good question. I think that is a really difficult line to tread, because there are definitely instances where maybe it isn't as relevant and it doesn't need to be like brought up, and then there are instances where it's actually really relevant, and shying away from it definitely just makes the situation worse, and color blindness and ignoring it is something that doesn't help. And I mean, like a conversation I had like on the GB rowing team a few months ago was surrounding like Meghan Markle leaving the royal family, and to ignore the fact that she's a person of color will just take away like like so many things. And I mean, if we really want to sit here, it's a joke to actually think that she was never a victim of racism, and it's a joke to think like how she has felt that she had to leave the royal family. But here we have Prince Andrew with sufficient evidence of being in part of a flipping child molesting ring, and still just being like, oh, I want my life to be back to normal, like, oh, poor me. And we have Meghan Markle, this like sensational feminist who stands up for women's rights, a successful woman, a successful actress, and all people can talk about when she left the royal family was who's going to pay for her security. And no one wanted to ask the questions, why did she leave the royal family? Why would everyone want to leave the royal family? That's a huge thing to step away from, and there must have been something really big at play for that to happen, and the media doesn't talk about it, so it definitely perpetuates the fact that people aren't talking about it. And it would be a huge mistake not to notice the fact that she is the first ever person of color in the royal family, and she felt so uncomfortable that she had to leave the whole country. And that is I just think that to ignore that is really difficult, and to me doesn't feel quite right.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely spot on. I mean, I never really thought about like I've always considered Meghan Markle's departure to be massively to do with the role of the media. But when you compare it to Prince Andrew like that, I mean, contrast. White male, black female. Yeah, absolutely massive. And so I suppose, do you think talking of media and stuff, do you think there's a responsibility on sporting communities to use their platforms to act? Because I kind of feel like there is, but I don't know how do you feel about that?
So in terms of responsibility, I think that's a really difficult word, and where responsibility lies among the whole chain of a whole system. In terms of media, I think it's really important that there just is a true representation of what it means to be a person of color in that sport, and to make sure at that point there is just equal representation and fair representation. And I think there is importance to make sure it's obvious that everyone is welcome within a sport, regardless of color or size or anything, if that makes sense. And so kind of like on your previous question, when is it appropriate to talk about someone being a color or not? It's the same relevance as talking about someone being short or tall, like if someone's short, they can't reach the highest shelf in a supermarket, and that's just a fact. And the same with if someone's a person of color, they're much less likely to be on the world stage of rowing. And it doesn't mean we have to start being like, oh gosh, you're black so you're rubbish at everything, and oh, you're short, you're rubbish at everything. It's not about that. It's about acknowledging it and being respectful of it. And it's, to me, it's difficult to say where the responsibility lies. But I think, to me, it lies with everyone, and I think everyone can really make a difference if they if they really have the energy to do so. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from my perspective, one of the things that sport has taught me is that, you don't have to make a huge change straight away. You make small changes day by day, and you will get better. And I suppose, people can take that into their own lives and try and, use that. So it's not, you're not going to fix yourself by tomorrow just by having one conversation, but actually, using your platform if you've got one, but just as a human being, learning yourself and growing and understanding, people of color and their experiences a little bit more each day to eventually, hopefully, make it a more equal world.
Yeah, I was just going to build on that. It's sad to bring in a cheesy cliche, but it's almost as simple as, if not you, who's going to do all of this work, and if not now, when? And now seems like a perfect time with the forefront of this movement, and I think everyone can make a difference. And I think it doesn't have to be a grand gesture, but there are much more white people than people of color. So if every white person reaches out to people of color, that is a monumental change, and something that I think everyone can be a part of.
So I suppose, off the back of talking about like platforms and that kind of thing, the question I'm wondering is, how do we address the issue without forcing all Black people to become spokespeople? Because obviously, as a white rower, when people see me competing on the international national stage, it's not remarkable. But every time you do something, you sort of have to become an ambassador for it. And I'm wondering, do you find that a burden?
I mean, for me personally, the notion of representing a whole race, and if I succeed in rowing, and that being a representation of a whole race having the ability to do something we didn't quite know we could do or could not do before, for me that's just as much as a success as the individual achievement in the sport. And I think every time I go and play a sport or I do anything, it's always a matter of, who am I representing? And if I go to the Worlds or the Olympics or whatever it is, yes, I'm representing my country, and yes, I'm representing UCLA and all of the clubs that I've been part of. But it turns out I'm also representing this whole race. That isn't something that sits lightly with me. I feel that responsibility, and I feel almost a pride in that. And I would be extremely proud to have left this sport and made a difference to what younger people of color feel like they can or can't do. And that's just as much an achievement as winning a gold medal to me.
Awesome. That makes sense. That makes total sense. That's so lovely. And I know I'm your peer rather than, so it sounds a bit weird to say, but like, I'm just so proud to be on the team with you. And that's not a path I can tread, but if I can help you to tread it, I think I speak for all of the athletes on the GB rowing team when I say that's what we want. We want to help you do that, and we're really proud to share the team and the building and the whole thing with you. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. And I was going to ask, at the end, to kind of wrap up, for white people now taking the learning into their own hands, is there, one resource that you'd recommend? But I'm sort of assuming it's the book that you mentioned earlier, but there might be another one.
No, yeah, I think, really similar to before, like Remy Odolodge's book, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, is a really great resource. But I don't think there's anything more valuable than talking just to a friend or a peer or a person or a colleague of color. And I think if anyone takes anything away from today or this podcast, it's just to have that conversation. And it might be really scary, but I can't imagine you come out of it the other end feeling burdened. If anything, it can be enlightening. Yeah.
And we've made it to the end, and I think we're still friends, so it can be done. I've certainly learned more in the last hour than I have in the last 26 and a half years of life. And listening to you speak, it's so powerful, and you're so passionate about what you're saying, and that really comes across. And it's just, really been brilliant to listen to you. And some of the tougher questions, that you, when you talk about, Black people being bred for sport and that kind of thing, it's really, I think, rare in a day when you come across a piece of information or you hear something that really sort of shakes you up. And I've had, 3 or 4 of those experiences in this conversation. And I think that's so powerful. And I hope the people listening or watching this podcast have those same, I suppose, periods of enlightenment. But yeah, they really hit hard. And so, I think it's very brave of you to speak about this stuff. And I just wanted to say thank you on behalf of me and anyone who's listening, because it is really brave. And I think, it's very powerful. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for listening, Holly. I mean, you've been a great listener and a great questioner, and I'm really grateful that you reached out to have this kind of conversation.
Brilliant. So I suppose we just leave it with people listening or watching, go and have conversations with your friends. If you've got any questions, I suppose we're open to take them, and hopefully people can get in touch with you on social media and that kind of thing if they've got questions as well. But yeah, go and speak to your Black friends. And if you have any, why not?